Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us here in the room and online. My name is Julie Bickel. I'm the project manager at the LMU in Munich for getting us in charge for getting us onto FOLIO eventually. Our institution is also a member of the Bavarian Network of Libraries, one of the 6 networks in Germany. And my third job is a product owner in the circulation area for the FOLIO software development. But most importantly, today, right now, I am your moderator for this session about release management. This session actually came up from merging 2 session requests. The first one was informational, questions about how releases are managed, and especially how the new critical service patch works. This will be the first part of our presentation. And we'll go through, I'll give you a broad overview of the of how releases are generally managed. Then Alexei Petrenko, who's also on the call here, will go into more detail of the release timeline, and will also describe the critical service patch process. And at the same time, we're hoping, or I would hope, that we can answer a number of questions that have come up to me or to my colleagues, over time, severally about how releases, questions around releases. The second session submission came from the PO group after Poppy was postponed. Generally, the question was, how could, what would an ideal release look like? And I believe that this is not just about what product owners or from the development or the release side want, but it's also about what would work then for people who are hosting FOLIO, people who are deploying FOLIO, people who are using FOLIO. And that's why I'm very glad as well today that, sorry, I'm looking for the right slide. I've lost it. There we go. That Kristen here can explain from her side what it means to deploy and to update FOLIO accordingly. And this also gives us an overview of and understanding some of the challenges that can exist, but also maybe what's good. Yogesh Kumar will then follow up by explaining some of the improvements that are being implemented to the release process accordingly. And from all this information that we hand over, hopefully some questions are answered, but there'll be new questions as well that arise. And that's what I'm hoping the second part of the session will be. When I envision going towards an ideal release, it's about how can the release process, work for everybody. And I'm hoping there are questions about, what are the challenges for the different stakeholders? Any questions you may have about the release management, you can also ask here. We've got a retro board. Kalila also, thank you, is manning the retro board, where we'll put some of the comments, either improvement requests or things that work well from this session so that we can use these later on. And my aim is to hopefully broaden the understanding of the challenges and needs from all the different stakeholders around release management. I'm honored to be in such a large hall with so many people today. Nevertheless, I was hoping this would be a discussion at the end. I know it's a large room. We do have some mics so that we'll pass around, but please don't hesitate to ask questions later on. Thank you, everybody who's on Zoom, who's joined us virtually. Please, if you do speak up or if you're listening, please do use your headphones, because as you can hear, it's very loud in here and it'll end up echoing if you don't have any headphones on. Yes, looking at my fellow colleagues here.
I just wanted to invite people to come and join us here. There are 4 empty seats.
Exactly. Exactly. Right, so then, without further ado, I will kick off the part, the informational part, and I will start with a very high-level description, a visual description of, say, the release process, setting the scene, but essentially, it's kind of product development lifecycle, which often culminates then with the software release at the end. This is a simplified overview so that it's easy to understand. You know, it's not always quite as linear and as separated, but I believe these are the main parts that then are a part of the release life cycle. We start at the top on the orange side. Librarians have requests for their software. We need to gather them. We need to understand them. Then a lot of the work is then, I've called it here, maintaining the backlog, refining these requirements. I called it translating them so that the developers, who are often not librarians, know how they can then implement those requests for the librarians accordingly. And for what it's worth, that can also be quite a chunk of work and very iterative, going back and forth between the librarians who want something, the what, and then the programmers who will then figure out the how it's implemented. And then based on limitations or further discussions, this is a loop. Once those features are refined sufficiently that they can then be programmed, well, that's the next step. You can go and program it. I've put as a next step here linearly, but it is also works very linked with the programming the features, running QA. Each feature individually will have a QA process, but then there's the larger project QA session at the end that we all know and love, Bugfest. I've put right documentation here, again, maybe not necessarily right at that point. It should happen all along the process there, but that should also take place so that the people who will then use Folio know how to use it and are ready to use it when the software is released. The new version is released. We have a new flower in our garden. I believe that's often a culmination point, right? But the cycle continues where once a version is released, we may see that there are some problems that need to be fixed. And I've called it here manage the maintenance of the released version. And from that aspect, that flows back into requirements. They could be bugs, but they could also be new gaps that we recognize. And they feed back into the requirements, and the cycle of software development then keeps on turns anew. I've put in the middle here what I think is an important and a valuable aspect is that there are groups of people, I think of the councils, the first ones that come to mind, whose job or their activity is to help coordinate, you know, all this work that happens around releasing the software. At the very least, you know, making sure that there's information out there, but also proposing processes and giving a structure so that hopefully we're all working together in a similar direction, right? So that's from the software development activity. For me, it was very important also to highlight that requirements, you know, they come from librarians, but they should also come from people who use the software. So once the software new version is released, I've added then an extra here in blue-gray, like half circle, to highlight that while on the software development side or management side, we're managing the maintenance or we're managing this released version, people are then using Folio, different levels. It's got to be deployed, new features need to be configured if applicable, data needs to be migrated, or if, you know, maybe it needs to be then cleaned up again or edited depending on what the new features are. Manage change, very few words for me, a large part of, you know, processes may change. That's very, you know, there may be new processes, we may get rid of processes, staff need to be trained, maybe new support systems need to be put in place. The extra systems, barnacles, as I heard them, I like that name, you know, need to also be considered so that it all, Folio and the whole ecosystem together works. And then librarians start using the software. And when they use the software, there's usually also feedback. Neutral, like what's your experience, what also is maybe missing, maybe we identify new gaps, maybe something's broken and then needs to be fixed, and this experience then also feeds back into the requirements that need to then be refined, even if it's a bug, and then the cycle of software development turns then anew. So, like I said, a simplified, overview, but I hope it's a good way of visualizing the phases and the concept of what software development is that culminates into a release. And on the next slide here, what I've done is that I've tried to flatten the loop and translate those phases into linear time. And one message I wanted to bring here by showing this is that even if the loop, when I described it, it was linear, in practice, we're often, if not working on, then at least taking care of, as you can see here, at least 4 releases at the same time. Because Poppy was postponed, in actual fact, it's not quite as squished as the bottom as it has been in the past when we have 3 releases per year. In that case, sometimes we actually have on our radar 5 or maybe even 6 releases if we're looking at some larger features that take a lot of refinement and that we're still working on, but we know sorry, there's not enough time to develop them now, but they will come down later on, right? We can start from the bottom and go back up, right? So we're always gathering requirements. That's a constant topic. We do have timelines where we say, okay, we decide what's going to go into a release. And then there's still a bit of buffer to make sure, I've called it here maintain backlog, but to make sure that those requirements are refined enough so that they can be programmed. At the moment, we're here, I think we're in sprint, 171, 172, something like that at the moment, I believe, 172. When we go back 1 release here at Poppy, that's where we're at. The teams are also, actively developing on Poppy. I know the timeline has been pushed back for Poppy accordingly, but nevertheless, it still works. When we go back 1 sprint here, ORCID is now available and is being, I don't know if anybody's yet on ORCID. I believe so now already, right? So it is being used. We would have been in this here for Poppy, essentially, if it wasn't postponed, but the principle still stands that to release the software, if we go back, there's a general announcement. Before that, there's the big Bugfest session, and then at some point there's development freeze, and that has to happen so that we can test accordingly. And then we go back 1, and we're still supporting Nolana for any critical service patches accordingly, right? And so for me, it was important to show and highlight the fact that there's never ever 1 release on people's minds in the development in the project. There's always at least 4, if not 5 or 6, and that's, one reason why, we want to try and avoid critical service patches as much as possible, or why there was the conversation of limiting the scope, because every service patch is a mini release in itself. It is work, needs to be organized and managed. And, it's an extra, we're managing several releases at the same time. I hope that provided a high overview to give a bit of context to go into the juicier aspect, I think, of the presentation today. I'll hand over to Alexei, who will start by going into more detail on the second line there for ORCID, what happens between dev freeze and the general announcement, and explain what happens, what time it takes, and what it all involves. And then he'll also continue on with the critical service patch. Alexei, over to you. Let me know when I should.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here and just tell you a little bit regarding our releases and timeline. Yeah, I'm here in this FOLIO maybe more than 3 years, 3.5 years. It's the first time when I participated in WOLFcon. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Yeah, today I heard excellent joke on presentation when Vince and Craig were talking about application manager. Someone asked in the chat, application manager, is it a person? So yeah, I'm a release manager, I'm a person. Okay, let's move to the next slide. All right, so guys, I decided to simplify as much as possible first slide and give you grasp of our release cycle. So everything what has happened after the freeze. But at the same time, I want to say that even before the freeze, we've got a lot of stuff which are on our plate. For example, when we are introducing new modules, yeah, we need to make a lot of steps. We need to share this information with community. We need to go to technical council and approve these new modules, deploy it to our reference environments, and so on and so forth. So it's a really long journey, even before the freeze, right? But when the freeze has been achieved, so what we expect, so our expectations follow, right? So no new feature can be added after this date. We also expect the definition of done for features have been met, and only defects are expected that need to be fixed. So defects or some small improvements, because usually after the freeze, we still continue conducting some kind of user acceptance testing, right? So we are gathering first feedback and trying to fine-tune our new features, trying to fine-tune our applications and modules. And in between of these dev freeze dates and module release, so we have a lot of stuff that has to be done, right? So period of modules releases, it's some kind of process of packaging our modules, but you should also keep in mind, right? So that we've got tons of dependencies between modules, and when Craig and Vince were talking about application manager, it's just a software, guys, so please keep in mind. So we are trying to get and fix all dependencies because we've got a lot of modules which rely on interfaces from another modules, right? So we've got a core set of modules, right, like a copy, like RMB, Spring-based library, which we also need to upgrade prior to the freeze, but during modules releases, all teams so trying to resolve their dependencies, bump up interfaces versions, provide initial packaging, right? So I always strongly recommend, even if teams are focusing on working on some remaining stuff related to the maybe features or some bug fixing, yeah, please go ahead and make initial release. It will help Kit Fox team on next stage, which is called Bugfest. And one more thing which is important for module release stage, and it's kind of finalization of feature work, is updating of release notes, right? So dev teams and PO should gather and decide what information have to be included into release notes. It is really important for us, and I already notified people related to Poppy release notes that, yeah, please don't forget to include all information about first part of Poppy into release notes, because I'm 100% sure it will be hard to remember what was 3 or 4 months ago, because time on Folio is moving extremely fast. So, and let's move to the next stage, which is called Bugfest, on my opinion. So it's usually include our release integration week. What does it mean, right? So we are taking code base from previous release. We are applying some kind of cleanups if it's required, or data update on our Bugfest data set. And we are trying to migrate previous release, and our goal to get the green light of the migration to new release. So to make sure that all libraries which are already using new release, previous release, right? So will be successfully migrated to new one. It's just one of the part of the testing, right? So it's some kind of DevOps testing, I can say, but from time to time, we're also getting some migration problems, and as part of modules releases period, it's also included some kind of schema migration testing, right? So dev teams need to make sure that their migrations will be successful. Yeah, but at the same time, KitFox team already prepared automated pipeline on Jenkins, which is allowing us to like execute data migration testing, schema migration testing, even every day. So yeah, I guess that's it regarding Bugfest. Yeah, a little bit, right? So regarding test execution, so yeah, we've got a lot of test cases which are prepared by our QA engineers and by POs. And we're always asking for assistance from community because we've got tons of test cases. We are moving forward with test automation. I guess Yogesh will bring some light into this topic later. But yeah, we still have a lot of tests that need to be executed. Yeah, maybe in the future it will be improved a little bit somehow. Yeah, once our test case execution is finished, it's usually 2 weeks, right? So if we are talking about modules releases, in the past it was 1 week, 2 weeks, right? So for Poppy, we are trying to compress a little bit our module release period. For now, it will be 1 week. So 2 weeks of Bugfest and also bug fix period, right? So what is focused on this? So first of all, yeah, we want to fix defects which were found during Bugfest. It's our important goal. So final update of release notes, just to collect information from Bugfest to make sure that it will be reflected on release notes. And last stage of bug fix period is our final smoke test execution. Yeah, as I said, we've got some bunch of tests which are automated. Even it's mostly our smoke test suite has been automated already, but from release to release, we still like producing new features, and we need to like I'm not sure that we are able to complete automation of these use cases up to the end of bug fix. That's why manual work also expected. And last stage here is just announcement, right? So yeah, in the past, this and between bug fix period and general announcement, we usually have a 1 week for some kind of unexpected events. It's just kind of reserve, right? So for possible uncertainties. Yeah, and in the past, all this period took usually 2 months. For now, we just compress it a little bit and we move out 2 weeks. So in this case, it will be 1. In case of Poppy, it will be 1 month and a half. So that's why, yeah, you need to wait so long after dev freeze, a development freeze, right, and general announcement. So a lot of stuff which we are making like under the hood. So next slide, please. Yeah, and here you can see my regular timeline for with different activities. Here I just took example of Poppy release, and yeah, you can see a lot of activities which development teams usually take into account, and all this stuff is like documented, but maybe not all. Yeah, because I did not include into this process some kind of steps of adding of new modules, right? So it's just a release of existing modules, some upgrades, some providing of interface versions that need to be updated, modules releases, schema upgrade testing, and so on and so far. A lot of different activities which are put in this huge sequence. So hope I will give you a little more clarity related to a release process and why you should wait so much time before announcement.
Brilliant.
Okay.
was going to say, thank you for that, Alexi. This is available on the wiki. It is all out there to see and enjoy. If you're not sure where it is, please reach out to me. I can forward you a link accordingly.
Yeah, you can find a releases space. Yeah, I'm trying to keep information up to date, and with help of PO and Anne-Marie, we've got a lot of information posted there. All right, so guys, and that is probably a regular release cycle. Here you can see a last milestone release is public, right? So, but what's happened next? Next slide, please. So, and next, if, as Julie said, we usually can detect some possible improvements, some defects, because each library is like really different, right? So each library can have their set of settings, their set of system which they are using, and we can anticipate some fixes. Next slide, please. So not far ago, right? So we've got a hotfix process, but it was something similar to small release, right? So we just announced a planned date where hotfix should be released, and we just gathering a lot of different tickets from different tracks. It was really hard to control all scope of this hotfix, and yeah, and it was really, from my standpoint, it was hard disruption for development teams, because we by some reason need to allocate a lot of time for hotfixes and so on and so far. And that's why we decided to change this process a little bit. So, and call it critical service patch process. So, and our goal was not to release a huge set of modules, not to release a minor release, but provide targeted small software patches that address only your critical issues, not a lot of something which nice to have, right? But only critical issues that significantly disrupt your workflow, your work, and will allow you to back on track once it will be done. Next slide, please. So, and what's new in comparison with hotfix process, right? So first of all, I can say that we added clear documentation related to whole process, from requesting up to approval and so on and so far. So we've provided some new roles. We explained in a wiki who is like release management stakeholder group who are approving it. We've added a new people to this group to make sure that it will represent different parts of our FOLIO community. So from my standpoint, it was a really, really important step here, and a really good improvement. Next step from my standpoint, it's just we reduce time to market for post GA changes. We are announcing it every sprint of and delivery of small set of patches, right? So, but besides that, you can like use these modules on your libraries, on your websites once it has been released, right? Because from my standpoint, for me, it's really hard to announce it after every release, because we also have some verification process, test process, and that's why we like license announcement to the end of the sprint, somewhere at the beginning of next sprint. And third important step here, what's new, right? So it's helped to reduce context switching for development teams. So we just focus only on critical stuff. Next slide, please. So one more improvement, right? So what we like introduced in critical service patch, we decided to show for everyone what can be included into critical service patch and what cannot be included. right? So just to reduce some kind of like nice to have changes that probably we can release because, okay, we are still, anyway, we are releasing module. Why we cannot include nice to have? We cannot, yeah, because it will like bring additional level of changes, right? So, and that's why in critical service patch, we strongly recommend include only P1 bugs and maybe P2 bugs without reasonable workaround. It is really important for us, right? So, and what cannot be included? P2 bugs with workaround. So if we can wait, okay, but better to wait until next release. P3, P4, unprioritized bugs, user stories, tasks, it's what we like not expect to be part of critical service patch. Next slide, please. So, and here you can see just example of information that approval group, approval panel want to see from requester, right? So when PO or some person decided to initiate or ask for approval, first of all, it should describe issue impact on the business, right? So just collect list of affected institution. So we've got a appropriate field in Jira. So also should like note workaround if exists, right? So because if workaround exists, in this case, probably it's not a critical service patch, it's not a critical issue. So what areas will be impacted by this fix? It's important from testing standpoint. It's important from delivery organization standpoint to understand from hosting organization standpoint to understand what areas should be like controlled during deployment. Yeah, also we expect some brief explanation of technical implementation and a level of technical risks. So because release management stakeholder group should evaluate this risk during approval. Also, some details regarding testing, how and what you're going to test, how much effort is required, and so on and so far. And important is the rollback plan, right? So for now, unfortunately, in most cases, we just moving back these changes. But in the future, I expect that probably we should think about how to introduce some kind of feature flags, feature toggles, which will allow us not to redeploy modules in case of some failures, right? So just switch off feature and then move forward and use software as it was before deployment. So that's probably it from my side related to critical service patch. Yeah, hope that you found this information useful. Thank you, everyone. Julie?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alexei. Yeah, so I hope that was helpful, informative. If you have questions, please hold on to them tightly. There will be time later on to ask those questions and find answers to these questions. We've talked here from the software development side, what happens to release, including these extra little mini releases. But now I'm very happy to hear now from the customer side, so to speak, from Chicago. How would you like me to, do you want me to?
Just leave it there. I have my speaker.
Okay,
here, so
excellent.
I'll have this mic.
So, thank you.
Okay, got the speaker note here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience dealing with migrating to new releases once we already have been on Folio from the University of Chicago's perspective, and just to give you a sense of like what our database is like and what our history is. So we migrated to Folio. We were on another open source system, Olay. We were one of just a handful of libraries that were running it. And we migrated in January 2022. So it's been about a year and a half. So we've had some time to do this a few times. We have about 9.13 million instances, close to 10 million holdings, and then over 10 million item records. So that's about the size of our database. And our Folio instance is hosted by Index Data, and we actually run 3 different versions. We might be a little more intense about this than some people, but we do have our production instance, and that's a fairly self-explanatory why we would have that. We also have a test instance. The test instance pretty much always has to be on the same version of Folio as production because we use it for our production workflows. So anytime that we're doing loading, we kind of verify that what we think is going to happen with that data load actually does happen in the test instance. And so we can't have it be like on a different version because it might behave differently. So, so we also have a migration instance, and this has really come in handy not only for migrations, but also for when we've tested things like fiscal year rollover, or we have some other like integration testing where we want to mess around a little bit more. So, we have various considerations about upgrading. We have like 2 calendars that kind of drive our decisions. We have our academic calendar. Like right now, you probably notice it's really quiet on campus if you're here. And that's because we're in an intersession. We also have like our fiscal year calendar. So, you know, things really heat up a lot in June. We have to get ready to close the books and open the new books, and then things quiet down again. And then, you know, we also have our hosting provider Index Data. Like they have to kind of work over the weekend. They have to coordinate with their other customers. And so we work with them to find a good time. Then we're also thinking like, how much do we really want this particular flower release? And what kind of concerns are we hearing from other people? Especially if we're not one of the first people, we kind of like poke around. We're like, hey, how's it going on that new version of Folio? So it's always good to know. So, you know, so we work closely with Index Data. We look at the release notes. We look at the release digest that's on the wiki, definitely using all that stuff that Alexi was sharing out there. We kind of need to make some decisions about breaking changes. So if there's things that are coming in Folio that are really going to change things and how we have our database set up, we need to know about that. And then we can work on the timeline. So this is kind of a rough step-by-step. So first you get the new release out there. All right, so then we get together, and those of us that maybe are leading a functional area, we take a look and we say, okay, what's out there? What's going to change? What's new features? What are some features that maybe are going to change our existing workflows? And then we can think about a timeline. We look at the academic calendar, the fiscal calendar, the availability of the hosting provider. So all these things come into play. We got to set up the migration environment. That might be a big deal. It might not. It might depend on what the changes are. If there's a change to record structure, or we have to do a big re-indexing, that can be quite substantial. Then we go through and we need to do testing on our migration server. One of the things that we learned is like making sure your permissions work is really important, because if you're like, hey, everybody go test, and then they're like, I can't create a new purchase order. Well, then you waste a lot of time. Like, first of all, people get frustrated, and then you're like, oh, that's because all the permission sets shifted and we didn't have them set up right. So that's the first thing to do. We have different people in different areas who take responsibility for verifying the regression testing in an area. So like my area is acquisition. So if I pick on acquisitions, I know Dennis is here, it's just because that's the area I know the best. And so we took certain workflows, we put them in a spreadsheet, and we just make sure like we can create a new purchase order. We can enter a new, you know, if we have a patron request, we can do that. We can pay an invoice, just check those things. And I don't personally have to do the testing, I just do the coordination. We try to have 1 or 2 people test key workflows. Then there's also new features. These might not stop us from migrating, but it's good to just kind of know about them and also see like how new features could impact our existing workflows. So then we have to make our own go, no go decision based on what we might come up with. Assuming everything looks good, the migration happens, and then, you know, Todd, who's also here, sends out a bunch of emails telling people when they shouldn't be in Folio and what we're going to do and what the timeline's like. And then people in Index Data get up really early in the morning and they do the migration, and hopefully everything runs pretty smoothly. So this is kind of a list of our different flower releases that we've gone. As I mentioned, we went live in January 2022. In April, we migrated to Kiwi. And then in rapid succession in June, we migrated to Lotus because we really wanted to get on Lotus for fiscal year rollover. There was features in there we needed. Then we were all exhausted and lots of things didn't go as smoothly with because we didn't maybe do as much regression testing as we should have. So we decided there wasn't anything in Morning Glory we really wanted, and it was okay to just essentially skip it. So when we did our next upgrade, we would just pass through Morning Glory, like a little stop, and end up in Nolana. In theory, that should have worked pretty well. In practice, it was a little more difficult than we thought because it was just a lot of new features, and the whole migration process was quite involved. So currently right now we are doing our ORCID testing. And we're anticipating actually being able to migrate in a couple weeks. Again, looking at our academic calendar, this is a good time to do it. You probably noticed there is a lag time here. Sometimes it's quite significant. So when we had decided after our experience migrating to Lotus right before fiscal year rollover, we didn't want to migrate to ORCID right before fiscal year rollover, even though we knew it had things we really wanted. So we made sure that we could handle that, and that was a little rough. So I would say, you know, we've learned some lessons about this. Like I said, we've set up regular workflows for regression testing, and we have a contact person. It says for each year, but it should say for each area. So, you know, we might identify some new bugs. They might be things that are in our local environment. They might be things that are actually bugs across Folio. And so we have to do some research on that. And, you know, and some things, it might be like, there's new functionality. So how is it going to change our existing workflows? For example, we have a number of purchase orders that we had created before we migrated to Kiwi. There was a different like purchase order to inventory connection that came into play with Kiwi, but anything you created before Kiwi, suddenly it didn't work the way we thought it should. It was unanticipated. And so we had to adjust our workflow to be able to get those connections. Otherwise we are ending up with like unanticipated behavior. You know, more recently with ORCID, we're getting these, again, picking on orders, but we get the order history in there. I don't know what's going on, but for some reason, when I make changes to orders in orders that were created not in ORCID, the order history isn't working. It sounds like it's working for other people. So maybe that's something in our local environment we need to look at. And so that's the type of thing where there's a lot of like detective work that needs to go on. So there's a lot of, you know, this review, and then sometimes we do run across permission issues. Well, actually all the time we run across permission issues. And so we're checking for that, and we're like, oh, what happened there? And so we need to leave this time for testing, and for like a lot of our data loads, like we load hundreds and hundreds of files every month. So pretty much during this testing period, our data management team, when they're loading records, they load them into production. They also load them into migration and just see like, hey, did it behave the way we thought? Did we get all of our profiles? Are they updated? Did they work the way we think? As I mentioned before, skipping a release, yeah, you do save yourself some pain at that point in time, but you will still have the pain later on. So, you know, you kind of, you can't really avoid it. And I think we've gotten better about just communicating with staff about what's going on so that nobody has any like heart attacks about things. And I have to say the actual migration, like by the time we get there, that's been pretty good. Sometimes we run into things afterwards that are not so great, but the actual migration process has been very smooth. I will say we've also learned like afterward, like Folio, the UI really likes to be in the old version. No matter, like you can clear your cache, you tell people to do hard refreshes. I don't exactly understand, but for some people, it just doesn't appear on the new version. And so that's always a point of confusion. And while I've been talking about this, I can't say at this point how the critical service patches are going to impact things. With the hot fixes, sometimes we just sort of waited a while before we did the next flower release so we could just roll the hot fixes into our upgrade. The critical service patches are much more frequent. And so, you know, how much testing do we want to do for those? Like this seems like it might be overkill. but we also don't know is like, well, what happens if we're like, oh, we don't really want to do critical service batch 2, but then we're ready for 3. So do we need to do 2 and 3? And that might be particular to each circumstance. So we're not sure how that's going to impact everything, but I think this kind of is illustrative and just showing the amount of work sort of institutionally that we're going through to basically make sure that everything works the way it did in the previous version, or that we can take advantage of that new functionality that's coming in. All right, that is the end of my section. And now I'm going to turn it over to Yogesh, who's going to talk about things being done to improve the process.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me? Or can somebody confirm?
We can hear you fine.
All right, great. Hi, my name is Yogesh Kumar. I was hired earlier this year to identify areas of improvement and specifically really lead our QA processes and QA team that we have. We have 2 QA teams across EPAM and of course across the community as well that helps us quality test our product. We have both manual QA and automation QA across EPAM that we try to use to do it. So I'll dive right into it. Some of the things that we're going to do for improvements in the upcoming Poppy/Caslenia release that we have started. So I'll just talk about those things in next slide. Julie, please. I couldn't hear you, Julie. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yogesh, slide has changed. Yeah, please continue.
Yep, I will continue. Oh, no. There you go.
This
All
is
right,
the
perfect. Yes, perfect. So biggest thing, test early, right? I think I even read some of the retro board items that people are suggesting as well, is really the biggest focus we want to do is test as early as possible. As soon as the things are available, test it. So that's what this is all about. We are starting a industry standard thing called shift left journey. As part of that, there's going to be few initiatives that we're working on, and one of the initiatives already in progress in Poppy, and others we're trying to figure out as to start them as soon as possible. So one of the biggest initiatives we're starting is early testing in sprint testing. We're allocating right now our capacity within the EPAM teams, our community teams, about 30% capacity to test versus 70% to develop. Once the development cycle is completed, we basically go hard and test so that we don't really reopen that feature down the stream or find bugs down the stream, especially in Bugfest around the same feature, so that we don't have to go back and look at what code really broke changes, what code really was not tested, etc. So it's easier fix, it's early detected, developers get a feedback quickly, testers, test quickly. They don't wait for, the whole sprints for a release to get completed, like Alexei was showing in the Bugfest. It kind of changes the model of the Bugfest a bit, where, Bugfest going forward model, as soon as we can, we'll shift that to more user acceptance testing, business workflow testing. What is the end user cases that we can test in those, so we can get a better benefit out of the Bugfest in the community that knows the product well, that knows the feature very well, can really help us test during that part, rather than testing just the feature part and realizing, oh, the permission doesn't work or that doesn't work. I'd rather see a full task doesn't work and and detect those things. So other part of the initiative is we're trying to stabilize our automated tests. Right now we do have automation tests. They're roughly about 15% of our original releases. If I look at throughout our releases, morning releases, Glory, Lotus releases, Nalana releases, and Poppy, we have roughly about overall manual testing of about 3,000. Out of that, we have about 15% automated there. So we're trying to stabilize them, make them run every day, multiple times a day so the developers can get a rapidly feedback as soon as the test finished. We're trying to use machine resources more than human being resources, doing manual work. It's not easy to feedback in a manual work. Automated tests, hopefully, if they're written well, they'll give us the feedback very quickly on the changes that we're making. We also plan to accelerate that automation, by adding a few more people to the team, as well as some external resources, and looking at some new technologies like AI, et cetera, to generate code to automate it. We are working on a project with EPAM right now that we are just just started, where we will generate this code and bring it, hopefully, our automation to a much larger picture. The goal is about 80% coverage from automation. If you can get that, that'd be excellent. And like I said, the purpose will be these tests will run multiple times a day. Earlier feedback, that's the main reason. Other major initiative we're starting is user journeys. I think, I heard even Kristen talk about, how they go through the business workflows and the process they have. They have a spreadsheet with, their business workflows and the user cases or user tasks that they go through. We try to run them as early as possible in our cycle. So we'd like to collect those, working with our POs to actually, in our development process, understand what our customer does, what are the customer full tasks are, and run them through our QA process before even it gets to the customer. That will build a trust, that will reduce your cycle of testing, because we can prove it that, especially if we have an automation around it, we can even give you some automated tests so that you can run in your migration process in the future. So a lot of these initiatives are headed towards reducing the release cycle, finding the bugs earlier, reducing the bug fest to a different meaning, which is not, I shouldn't say reducing, changing the bug fest mean to more user acceptance testing, etc. So these are the initiatives that we are working on, and we started some of this work in Poppy, and hopefully it will go to the Q release, or as early as possible. We will implement all of these things. That's it from my part, Julie.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Yogesh.
Sure.
Okay. At this point now, we've wrapped up the informational part of this session. I'm coming back again to the FAQs. I don't think, hopefully some of these FAQs have been answered, though some of them are, larger topics generally. I can already see from here, and I think the retro board, the link is in the slide deck that's on Sked, has been filled out. And if you have, suggestions for later on, it's available online. Please feel free to fill it, to add your requests. And then we could come now to, brainstorming, collective next steps, or just generally a round of questions. If you have any questions or suggestions, I hope there are some from the audience here. If not, I have plenty of questions that I will ask our panel, but also then the audience accordingly. Checking the chat if there are any questions there. There are not. In that case, I'll smallly walk over to the audience and ask if there are any questions.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, there was a question, a couple of questions in the retro board, actually. One was big libraries test new releases instinctively before they upgrade. Can this be leveraged for FOLIO releases? I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about that.
Sure, I can make them some of the thoughts there. Like I mentioned earlier, yes, that will be excellent, because the leveraging that we can do from the big library is twofold. One is, if we can get help with their data into us, that helps us test those data set kind of early, which I totally understand that needs to be, PI'd. But the major thing that the big libraries can help us with is really understanding their use case and their full task-based business workflows. If we can bring in that internally in our QA testing, we can do that as well. And then, if they have some sort of automated tests, that we can run internally as well, that will be a very helpful tool. So yes, we can leverage F, absolutely. We want to leverage, actually, I shouldn't say we can, we want to leverage all of that stuff, from all our libraries.
Great, and I just wanted to add to that. Bugfest currently uses a data set that was provided by University of Chicago. It's it is the data set that Todd and others worked on preparing, and it's about 2.5, 3 years old or something like that. So yeah, if institutions can contribute their anonymized data sets that could be used in automated testing, that would be great.
Yep. Along with the use case, the test cases is also very important.
There we go. I could speak a little bit too, because I see there's also a question about like, what are we using for regression and new feature testing? So, we at least in acquisitions, we have a pretty low tech. We just list out some workflows that are common, and then we have 2 people test them and put comments in there. And it's like I mentioned, for data import, we run our normal data loads. We just run them through as we're loading them. And we could certainly share those workflows. I think some of what gets complicated also is there's nothing wrong with Folio. It just doesn't work the same. And so to some extent, people need to know like how those changes are going to impact their their documentation, their expectations. So there were a few changes in inventory, for example. If you search by a barcode now, it brings up the item record. This has turned into a big irritation for a particular member of the staff in technical services. So I got a long email about how much they don't like this. Now, I don't know if there's anything we can really do to change that. They don't want the item record to come up because it fills the whole screen and it makes no sense. And I think that's all been shared earlier. So that's not really going to help with testing. I mean, that's what it's supposed to do. It's just different. And, sometimes people like the different, and sometimes the different, they were used to what it was doing before and they had built workflows around how it worked before. And then there's some things that maybe are really particular to our situation. Like we have a workflow we test for entering an order for a patron request and making sure that we can go ahead and, put that, make sure that the title that's on order, that the request can be placed on it. And now I don't know why, but for some reason, people in acquisitions don't have the ability to like put an item in process in a requestable state. I don't think that's a Folio problem. I think that's something local again. And so it's sort of like, it's better to find these things out before we go live. And then we have, like 6 people in acquisitions that all have this as part of their job responsibilities, and no one can do it than like one person testing and saying like, hey, I think there's a problem with permissions here. So, to some extent, I don't know if we could skip some of these things. I mean, there is another example, not to pick on acquisitions again, but, we found that when you go to like create a new purchase order, if you haven't already done a search, you just can't, like there's a bug. Now that probably should have been caught earlier in the process. And maybe that's the sort of thing where we're providing some workflows would help, because, it was, people are like, oh, it's a permissions problem, I can't create a new order. I'm like, no, you just have to do a search first, then you can create a new order. And like that, it doesn't make any sense. So there's probably, some ways for the project to leverage it. But I think, any organization where you're going to be doing documentation and you're running procedures and people have certain expectations, they just have to know like they're going to work a little differently. And I think Folio is maturing. So there's, maybe not giant changes, but when there are big changes, those things just take time to get used to.
Are there further comments? Please.
Thank you for meeting me halfway.
Hi, my name is Larry. I'm from Chalmers University.
He's talking at the moment. Could you please mute yourself if you're not? Thank you.
My understanding from this presentation is that critical service patches shouldn't have new features in them. But when I was on the data import session yesterday, it sounded that they were going to push out splitting of files. How come?
Well, a rule wouldn't be a rule if there weren't any exceptions, right? So the urgency for deploying data import fixes is the criticality of this function. There are lots of institutions that would like to have that before the next major release. That's the only reason. Okay, but generally speaking, yes, I mean, critical service patches should be limited to laser-focused fixes. And they should not have anything that involves data schema changes.
So maybe this is a good follow-up to that. I don't know, because I actually didn't realize that the splitting was going to go out in a service patch. So the service patches that we've just had, there was like a series of bugs related to items that kept getting fixed in each one, and now we're still waiting on one related to the item sorting. And so I guess I'm just sort of wondering what the impression is of how it's gone so far. And you know, Cornell is like, we're out there, we're just gonna bust ahead, so we get things pretty fast. I don't know. Have we learned anything from this first set about that, what we might want to change? And the testing, sometimes it's, so I understand testing the sort of big swath of a workflow, but also sometimes it's helpful to understand what exactly it was that was changed so that you can come up with the things to test. And I wonder with this item situation, if that was a little bit of it, like the call from the UI got changed. And so we should have been really careful about testing every single, which is on, I'm not like, it's as much on us. It's not really a blame thing. I'm just kind of wondering what people are thinking about how the testing of those patches is going.
So I think for that particular soap opera, there was some change in there was several development teams involved with that work. And then there's also a change in the development team that was now responsible for the module. I think in hindsight, we rushed. We were trying to get the fix out as soon as possible, and we probably should have taken a little bit more time on with that particular issue. And that's why the soap opera continues with that one. So I think the lesson learned is don't rush.
A follow-up to that, I think part of your question, Jen, was also, and I think this is a question for Alexei, I guess. Is there anything we have learned already so far from the critical service patches? And if not, because it's too early, will there be a retro of it, essentially?
And while Alexei is collecting his thoughts, let me jump in, okay? So as far as the retrospective, most definitely we should do it. There've been, what, about 5 service patches so far? So there is plenty of material to learn from and to improve. So we should be scheduling one soon to go over the things that worked well versus things that can be improved.
Sure, Mark. Yeah, it's a good opportunity for us, yeah, just to talk with the people about critical service patch, what was really good, what was not. Yeah, great idea.
I have a question that I'm not sure if this will be helpful, but there was talk about skipping releases, and I'm not sure it's clear whether institutions can skip a service patch? Like, can you just take 6 or number 4? Is it even possible?
No. Yeah, I guess answer for this question, right? So it's our service patches are cumulative, right? So if you just keep, for example, service patch number 2, but then decide to install number 5, you will get everything 2, 3, 4, and 5 after installation.
Right, but you know, for further clarification, right? So when service patch 2 comes out, you don't have to have it. You can wait until service patch 3 or 4, but when you decide to upgrade to service patch 4, it will have all of the prior service patches. Please keep me honest, Alexei.
Yeah, Mark, you are fully correct.
And then once you decide to take one, you'll get all the prior ones.
Any further questions from the room here?
And wasn't there a question about what does ChatGPT think of release management?
It's not quite the end of the session yet. We'll totally show that before we close. Please, over.
I was just looking at the retro board and there's a question. QA engineers are really helpful. If a team doesn't have one, what can the team do alternatively?
Well, I think introduction of QA engineers, both manual and automation QA engineers, is a relatively recent change. It was introduced about a year and a half ago. So prior to that, we had to rely on the team to do testing manually. So, and POs were overloaded with having to do that work. And POs obviously are not in QA. So, you know, POs would mostly focus on happy path testing. And so, and while they're doing that, that prevents them from working on new features that should be developed for an upcoming release. So this is another area in which the community can help. So if there are teams that lack QA, maybe community can lend a hand and augment the team with subject matter experts who can act as QA testers.
I just want to echo what Mark said about QA. I'm going to speak now as a PO lead. I think I speak for all the POs. I love my QA. Like, I'm thankful for my QAs, especially Valerie and Johan. Yes, Alexei, I'm giving them a shout out. Without them, there's so many things I could miss. I try to get some of the non-happy path, but sometimes there's these edge cases. Especially since my team works a lot on authorities and authority control, and anybody who's dealt with that knows there's a lot of complexities when you think about Mark. So having them has been a great asset. So if anybody can provide a SME or a QA person who can help in these areas, I think it'll help tremendously.
By the way, one area of QA that hasn't been mentioned yet is performance testing. So as part of every release, there is a team called Performance Task Force. The team focuses on collecting critical workflows from different areas and developing scripts to simulate real-life situations. And so they set up a lab in which they would run performance tests. And performance tests not only look for how fast the response times are, but there are also so-called longevity tests. So when we run those tests over a long period of time, with a goal to detect if there are any memory leaks. And so all of this work is done in the shadows, so to speak, but prior to each release, the team may discover additional bugs, defects, which are then submitted back to the development teams, and the development teams will work on addressing those. So, and I think Yogesh mentioned it earlier, that what institutions can do to help is identify those critical workflows, so that can then be automated by the different teams.
Quick follow-up question to the performance testing. Is it isolated per area, like you test a whole, importing a whole bunch of instances, for example, and then performance for circulation is done separately, and performance for, I don't know if there is any in acquisitions or elsewhere, and is it trying to replicate a larger library where, you know, we're circulating and importing and buying and everything at the same time?
So there is methodology that's been developed by the performance testing force, which is led by Martin Tran. The way they approach things is they would first focus on a specific area, doing some simple runs. And then they may add more users performing different types of activities, so that they look for system response times in different areas. And they would also try to increase the load to see where the system breaks. So one outcome of their work is recommendation for what the deployment configuration should be, based on a certain size of the library.
Okay. The moment I see no further questions here, but you mentioned deployment configuration. That's one question I have for you or for anybody here. Listening here to the testing, I know we think of feature testing, very important. Even though I won't have to deal with it myself, because I have sorry, I've forgotten the word. Very good colleagues who can deal with hosting. Does hosting test anything at any point? And how and where? And yes, how and where, first of all. And then also, is there anything there that, are there any usual complaints from sysops, et cetera, et cetera?
I'll probably have to refrain from saying something because it creates more follow-up questions. So yes, when Julie, you were describing the overall release cycle, you talked about gathering requirements. As part of this is there is a process for collecting so-called non-functional requirements, and those requirements may come from hosting, from sysops, from system operators, basically. In EBSCO's particular case, when a release is announced, on the hosting side, they typically go through a hardening period. And this hardening period is usually 2 to 4 weeks. So this is when the new build is obtained from the community, and this is where we deploy it into different environments, using different data sets, using different tests to see how it performs. So we've automated this process. We've automated the smoke testing just to validate that some of the basic workflows have not been broken as a result of the new release. Okay, and this is when we may run into some permissions issues. I don't remember, Kristen, if you mentioned any permissions issues when you talked about. And then again, you know, the defects that are collected as part of this process are communicated back to the development teams, and they're being worked on.
All right. We're coming towards the end. I'd still like to look around, see if there are any questions, comments, stories to share. I don't think there was anything on chat, but also looking at my colleagues, it's at the top there, if there's anything extra from the retro board that we'd want to address today. Okay. then don't think there's needs to, artificially extend, keep us going until the end unless there are any last questions. We do have some last, here we go. I don't know if you'd like to take this on, Mark, just in the discussion with the great team that we've had here, the list of the people is at the beginning of the presentation, but talking about using AI and anyway, poems about release, there is a poem here for you to enjoy and read because, we feel the need for that often when we talk about releases, right? But it helps. I was impressed at least with the first verse, certainly. Okay, so it's here at the end of the deck. I'm going to zoom quick back up to close this session today, thanking, first of all, my colleagues in the project who help put this all together. Thank you all very much for that. You have our names here. You can find us on Slack and other places if you have any further questions or you just want to exchange and find out more. The retro board will stay open. Stay tuned for for any next steps in this area. I don't think it's the last time we talk about releases, and you'll be very welcome to join the conversations when we next have them. Thank you all for attending and for listening. Have a lovely rest of day. Thank you.